Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we're dissecting an explainer that honestly reads like a grim, dark Gothic fable. But underneath that aesthetic, it's actually this incredibly profound map of human psychology. We're looking at the inner fire, and specifically tracking one character's intense psychological shift from defensive isolation to a radical center led integration. So, if you've ever felt completely boxed in by your own strict rules or perfectly constructed logic, well, this is definitely going to hit close to home. To really set the mood, our guide through this whole psychological architecture is the gargoyle. He's cynical, sure, but intensely wise. He paints this incredibly chilling picture right off the bat. In the cold, silent depths of the high cathedral, a monument to death, we hide from the ancient, uncaring night. Notice how he doesn't call this cathedral a place of worship? No, it's a psychic fortress. It's literally an inescapable tomb built by our main character, the philosopher, just to shield his own fragile ego from the chaos of what he calls the Dionysian night. Talk about ultimate defensive isolation, right? So, what's actually driving the tension here? It's a massive clash between two completely opposing forces. On one side, you've got the philosopher's safe zone, the world of arrangements. This is all rigid Apollonian precision, locked down tight behind the seven tumblers, creating this iron cage of slave morality. Super safe, but honestly, completely lifeless. And then, on the other side, you have the Dionysian night. This is the fluid, alchemical imagination, entirely powered by the raw, unclassified fire of the dragon, or as it's sometimes called, the monster of energy. The whole story really hinges on this grinding, mechanical logic, desperately trying to hold back the wild, untamed fire of that dragon. For decades, literally decades, the philosopher kept this barrier up, just endlessly turning the gears of his reality to keep the chaos locked out. But we're about to track the total collapse of this psychic fortress. We get a front row seat to watch decades of mechanical recitation just completely shatter under the weight of all that repressed energy. Specifically, we're going to zero in on the exact moments the final three tumblers fail. The collapse kicks off right at the fifth gear. The philosopher mutters his absolute go-to desperate axiom: the sufficient does not require the dragon. But as he tries to force the gear to turn, he falters. For the very first time, he actually hesitates. He realizes, kind of suddenly, that his tightly controlled logic, this whole system he confidently calls sufficient, is totally hollow without the exact thing he locked away. The Grand Machine simply can't contain the dragon because, well, the dragon is the forgotten origin of his power. That roaring sound echoing from the vault, that's not just the building settling. That is the literal groan of his own axioms failing. And that brings us right into the intense friction at the sixth tumbler. To turn this gear, the philosopher has to look into the mirror of negation and face his ultimate central wound. See, 20 years ago, he had this brilliant student. She was the perfect bridge between his Apollonian precision and that wild alchemical imagination. But she asked him a question, one he just couldn't answer. And instead of admitting his system was flawed or incomplete, what did he do? He dismissed her. She walked across that bridge without him, and the bridge broke. For 20 years, he's used his rigid theology of institutions to hide from her unanswered question. He wasn't guarding some grand cosmic secret in that vault. He was hiding his own tragic, deeply personal failure. Now we hit the climax of his old worldview, and it's staged way up high on the cathedral stone spine. Just picture this, the philosopher, totally desperate, defending his vaulted certainty as the storm rages around him. He's yelling, "I have built a spiritual defense against the madness. This stone spine is the peak of human morality." He is literally clinging to his iron cage, trying to use this crumbling psychic fortress as a spiritual shield against the chaos he feels seeping in. But then, right out of the shadows, leaps the jester, and the jester is just laughing maniacally at all these rigid constructs. He uses that so-called peak of human morality as nothing more than a footstool. He mocks the philosopher right to his face, shouting, "Your psychic fortress is merely a tomb. This stone spine is nothing but a footstool for my leap into the pleroma." And with that, the jester hurls himself directly into the ultimate divine chaos, physically proving that this grand cathedral isn't a sanctuary at all. It's just a cage. Which brings us to the absolute breaking point, the seventh and final tumbler. Unlike all the others, this one isn't some rigid axiom of certainty. It's a haunting, deeply existential question. Staring out into the nameless night, watching the jester's wild leap, the philosopher is forced to look around at his towering psychic fortress and finally ask himself, Has what I've built been enough to live inside? Breaking decades of mechanical recitation, the philosopher speaks just one single, devastating truth into the night. No, it wasn't enough. And with that one word, the vaulted certainty of his entire kingdom just melts away. The rigid walls collapse, leaving him totally exposed to the impartial brilliance of the great star. He just stands there, witnessing the final, undeniable dissolution of all his careful arrangements. Moving on to the 18th variation, Architecture of the Inner Fire. This is where our Gothic fable pivots from a story of complete collapse into one of radical rebirth. We witness this profound architectural inversion. Think about it. His entire life, the philosopher built from the outside in, constructing these massive, thick walls of defensive isolation, a monument to death, really, built to protect his ego. But now, he flips the entire paradigm. He goes center outward. For the first time, he starts drawing his line starting at the fire. He finally accepts that the true source of reality isn't in his rigid, dead rules, but in the raw, fluid vibration of the depths. He's integrating that monster of energy right into the structural heart of his entire being. Naturally, this shift requires a total reimagining of what he calls the gasket. Previously, the gasket was just a clinical barrier. It was a seal designed specifically to lock the dragon out and keep his iron cage perfectly airtight. But in this new state of integration, the gasket is built completely around the dragon. His soul transforms from a fortress into an open vessel for the very energy it used to be terrified of. It's the perfect embodiment of devotion without possession. Logic and language aren't weapons used to track the divine anymore. They're beautifully placed in service of the dragon's fluid energy. And as this incredible transformation settles, our narrator, the gargoyle, steps in to shatter the very last illusion. He drops this devastating piece of truth. The solid wall the philosopher had been leaning his entire weight against for 20 years, it was always an open door. That boundary between his Apollonian logic and the alchemical imagination wasn't a physical limit at all. It was just a failure of will. The psychological stagnation was 100% self-imposed. And that key he needed to unlock the vault, he didn't need to go find it. It was already warm from his own chest. It was always his. He finally stops being a prisoner of the grand machine because the power to resolve that student's unanswered question was sitting right there inside him the whole time. As the philosopher leaves his ruined vault behind to face the great star, he finally gets it. The fire of the dragon was never some external threat. It was just the heat of his own living spirit, which really leaves us with a massive question to ponder for ourselves. What protective, heavy walls are you leaning against right now that are actually just open doors? What internal dragons have you locked away behind your own rigid logic? And what is your unanswered question just waiting for your own warm key to unlock it? Let that sit with you for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep exploring the architecture of your own inner fire.